on the past, if I may, because the origin of this activity came out of a conversation that I had with Ian Boyd, who shortly, as you know, will step down as Chief Scientific Advisor to DEFRA. And there are two broad headings, actually. One being the recognition that if Brexit occurs, then the task of regulating and managing our landscape will return to the UK, whereas for the last 50 years at least, it's been largely a question of taking whatever comes out of the EU. And the second is connected with the recognition of the fact that we will need to change the way we use the land surface if we are to reach a zero carbon situation, and that, as you now know from more recent events, is a stated intent of the UK to achieve. And we were discussing essentially whether we had a research base and a research capability that could respond to questions at that kind of national level. And out of that conversation, we formed a broad view that the immediate answer to that question was no. And the reason it was no primarily was partly in the face of the sheer complexity of all these questions, but also the recognition that very largely all of the various components that needed to be brought to bear if you were going to be even step on the road in trying to achieve the ambition of a downward understanding needed to be brought together, that they were all in different parcels. I think when I came and addressed a dinner, I think after the first scoping workshop, I just remarked slightly flippantly that the biggest mass flux in the UK environment is the flux of money. That's a statement that could be challenged on physical grounds at least, but what I was just trying to observe to people is that it's not enough just to simply study ecology or study how land use occurs, unless you can build up a joint understanding of all of the things that determine how land ends up being used. You're never going to be in a position to respond to questions about how we should take future decisions. And the second observation is that policy decisions are probably more important in determining things than are what the environment is doing all of its own accord. And indeed, if you take this question around zero carbon, you realise actually the policy response to the demand for zero carbon is likely to have a much more rapid and direct and profound effect on our land use than the effect of climate change itself, at least for, let's say, for the next 20 years. So out of that conversation came the notion that we should seek to find a way of bringing together communities to address what is in fact a formidably difficult question. The other weakness that you recognize if you realize that you're kind of short of what I might roughly describe as theoretical apparatus is you have no way of informing in a firm, objective way what data you might collect. Now, if we are familiar with the paradigm of climate and the fact that we have on the one hand the Navier-Stokes equations, and those equations are today fed by data, but the collection of the data is also formed by the equations. And if we look at that kind of thinking in this broader context, you find you've got the same weakness, that because there's a lack of general framework of how to approach these problems, there's no easy way of understanding how we should prioritize or go about collecting data in support of decision-making systems. The other origin of this particular event was that Jane tagged me at some meeting in Cambridge, nothing to do with this, and gave me a pitch about this organisation. And we had a discussion a bit later. I came here and to learn whether we could use in effect the model of the Isaac Newton Institute as a mechanism to try and bring communities together and engage in the kind of conversations that might start the development of what I might roughly call a new community. And if I'm allowed, David, I'll remark that in an email exchange you said to me in your mail, you said you do think it's time that mathematicians were prepared to deal with more dirty problems. And my response was, I suppose you mean useful. it is, you know, easy to take the climate paradigm and naively assume that there's some equivalent to Navier-Stokes. Well, it took 200 years to put Navier-Stokes together, and there's still turbulence is not exactly a solved problem. And this is a problem of much greater complexity, not least even in understanding what are the quantities that one is interested in pursuing or controlling or understanding the changes in. And it would, as I say, one should not underestimate or trivialize or make easy anything of the fabulous complexity of the problem. But nonetheless, if we are to be able as a research community to respond to the demands upon us, which increase all the time, I'll underline that, to be able to respond in practical terms to national priorities, then we are somehow failing, either as funders or as communities, to be able to respond to that challenge. So this today is the outcome of an initiative we undertook together to start that process of bringing people together. Now, Jane actually originally asked me to talk to the question of future funding, and of course what people really want to hear from Research Council Chief Executives is, will there be any money? Well, firstly, let's observe that there is some, and we built on those original conversations to successfully persuade UKRI to fund up two programs, one of which is around directly the topic of today, but the other one, which is about making decisions of the landscape, but the other alongside that is another program under the heading of digital environment, which is very much focused on this question of what data do we need to get and how do we need to get it in order to better understand dynamically what's going on in the landscape. And I do not exclude from that the better understanding of the fluxes of this quantity of money. So we have already a situation where we've built up quite a a stock of money in which to give this activity a push forwards. Anybody who reads the latest NERC delivery plan will see very clearly that we are signalling an intention and a commitment to push this whole area forwards, and that we do intend to significantly fund, broadly speaking, a system understanding of how the environment and systems of business engage or don't engage with one another. And I think if you want me to say, if you want to signal from me that this is an area we'd like to see grow, then you have it, because you can see it in our delivery plan. So to the extent that any community could be confident about the possibility of further support, if you're successful, I think you can have my assurance. But there is another flip side to that. Councils can be quite opportunistic, and they occasionally are very effective by suddenly demanding that the community has got over comfortable and it needs to wake up. So there have been, on occasion, big initiatives by councils. Genomics was one, for example, because there's a feeling that communities as a whole have just got somewhat, not exactly parochial, but let me say particular. But it's also the case that research councils on their own are not in the end sources of intellectual curiosity, and they're not in the end sources of intellectual achievement. And in order for councils over time to be successful, to sustain areas of science or research, we need a community that is feeding us ideas, and we need communities that are pushing us to make decisions in their favour. So at the same time as offering a picture, or an encouraging picture, I hope, that this is an area we'd like to see grow, I would also like to offer a challenge back, which is the more effectively you as a broad community can bring together agendas, introduce intellectual sharpness, and introduce a sense of intellectual priority in what you want to see happen, the better equipped people like me will be to make the case for further funding. So I guess I probably used up my time. I would just like to finish though with a direct thanks to the Isaac Newton Institute, David and Jane, because with all of the efforts that you've put in over the last year to bring this event to its fruition, and I'm very interested to see I'm not here all day idly to understand where you've got to and what messages I might take away. So thank you.